In the last few videos, I've been doing surprise forcing moves, and don't worry, I'll put more on eventually. I've got quite a few. I come across them every day. But I thought it would be really interesting for me to show you guys how sometimes combinations don't lead to outright wins, but instead lead to strategical advantages, and how different parts of the game are intertwined. Sometimes sometimes we have this tendency to think that strategy is one thing. Whenever you're thinking strategically, there's no calculation. It's just abstract thinking. And end games are one thing, and middle games another thing. But in reality, end game influences middle game, and tactics influences strategy. And this is a really good example of that. So, if you want to try to solve this yourself, this is white to move and not win, but white to move and what would you play? What do you think the best move is? And I'm gonna start solving it. This wasn't a problem. I was actually watching at Chess DVD, and this was it was on the French. This was a lecture on the French or something, and this came up. It's a game between Grischuk and Gurevich, and I saved the position, and I thought it was really interesting. So if we use the forcing move technique, we notice that first we have material balance, and next we have to identify weaknesses. Well, considering that black's pawn structure on the king side is all light squared, and that's coupled with the fact that white's bishop is dark squared, then we have to consider these as weak squares. Even though black has a bishop guarding them, that doesn't mean that they're not weak squares. Likewise, even though these squares are weak on the queen side, we don't have a light bishop to take advantage of that. So for the purposes of our analysis, I'm going to not consider them weak, just because there's no point. There's no way we can take advantage of that. Okay, next we have to consider this queen weak, because a weakness, because it's unprotected. So for the technique, for the forcing move method, we have to consider it a weakness, a target. Okay, so now we have to consider forcing moves. And I don't really want to talk about all the different forcing moves, because in this position you can discount almost all of them immediately. Rook takes knight, okay, well, rook takes rook, and that's stupid. Knight takes any of these is obviously not doing anything. So the only forcing moves that we have left that don't, just lose a piece are these pawn pushes on the wings. And we have to consider those. So let's look. Let's look at b5 first. If b5, then we have knight a5, and all of a sudden this knight is hopping into c4, and this queen is going to capture this pawn. So strategically, this is awful. It's terrible. We've created a weakness, and we've allowed the knight to access c4. So that leaves this move. That doesn't mean that if this move doesn't work, white has no good moves. That just means if this move doesn't work, white has no good forcing moves. Maybe white's best move here is to just play rook c2, or, well, not rook c2. Rook c2 is obviously not the best, but maybe queen h4 or something. And that's not forcing. But let's look at but if we can find a good forcing move first, we should play it. So let's see. So what about h6? Well, h6, black has 3 different responses he can capture: play bishop h8 or bishop f8. And we should obviously look at bishop takes first. That's obviously the most critical line, because if black just wins a pawn and there's no compensation, then that's a bad move. So after bishop takes, white has quite a few options, and they're all knight moves, really. I mean, you could say queen h4 is an option, but after bishop back, you haven't accomplished anything. So let's say knight takes any of these pawns first, and knight h5 is also one. Well, if knight takes d5, we might be thinking, well, if he does bishop takes bishop and knight takes, then we're in good shape. We've got our pawn back. But actually, black's best move there is queen takes knight. After bishop takes bishop, queen takes d4, and then queen is going to come back and capture e5. Let me get rid of all these other arrows so you can visualize this. So h6, bishop takes, knight takes d5, queen takes, bishop takes h6, queen takes d4. Let me just show it to you so that we can visualize this. And this is coming. And the problem now is that white can't prevent. Well, I guess white could play a move like rook e1. Well, he can actually. The queen is hanging, so white cannot prevent queen takes, and then all these weaknesses are not enough to compensate for the pawns. Okay. Okay. What about knight takes either of these squares, which actually transpose? Well, in those cases, okay, you get your pawn back because after pawn takes knight, bishop takes, you got your pawn back, and you've exchanged off this bishop for this knight, which is what we want because we want to get rid of the defender of the weaknesses. But you've also allowed the queen to guard all these problems, and that's okay for white. It's not bad, but let's consider it and see if we can find a better alternative. And this is very interesting. Knight h5. Obviously, bishop takes bishop is bad because remember this relationship. So which means that after knight h5, black has to play bishop g7, and then the forcing moves are check or knight takes, and check is bad. Obviously, just take, and this queen will maneuver over and guard, and we'll just be down a pawn. But after knight takes, king takes, we've done what we wanted, which is exchange these minor pieces, and black hasn't moved this f-pawn, so his queen can't guard this way, and let's see what that looks like. And this is actually how the game went. And now see if you can find the move that I consider kind of the end of this combination. It's not really, which is queen h4, and now white is eyeing all the weaknesses, and he sacrificed a pawn, but his compensation is he's winning here at least. He's not winning, but he's obviously much better. He's threatening stuff like this check, and just queen f6, and it's unstoppable mate, and it's just really unpleasant. And this is so the evaluation here is better for white. So this would be good. So good. So if h6 and bishop takes, we know that knight h5 is better for white. Well, what about bishop h8? Well, bishop h8 can't possibly be good, and we don't have to calculate this. We can just look at just imagine this position. Look at this bishop. If you were to eliminate all the pieces on the board in an endgame, this bishop is restricted, and it's just terrible. It's just awful. So that can't be good. And what about bishop f8? And we'll just move the pieces because there's not really that much calculation here. It's just some strategical thinking. We're combining, calculation with strategical assessment. And the assessment here is, well, this bishop is worse on f8 than it was on g7 because now we've weakened f6 more. And after a move like knight h5, bishop e7 maybe, all of a sudden our pieces are better than they were a few moves ago. We have more control. There's no immediate win, but if we can somehow at some point play maybe bishop here at some point, and try to get access to these squares. Not right, obviously not now. Now it doesn't work, but in the future, and this is obviously better for white. So this is the move that Grischuk played, and it's interesting to note that in the game, he this position in the game, he was down a pawn after the combination. He was down a pawn. He hadn't won material and he didn't mate, but the position is overwhelming, and it shows how combining this technique, this method, with some strategical evaluation can be very, very powerful.